My name is Sagar Mhatre, and we're going to be talking about Gradle today. Before we begin, so that's me on GitHub and Twitter if you ever want to catch up with me or check out my code. Before we start, a small correction. I submitted this topic as simplifying builds with Gradle. However, after I looked back at it, I kind of realized that that's not specifically what I was talking about. What I really want to be talking about is simplifying build scripts using Gradle. So there's a slight difference. We'll probably get to that in a few slides, but just wanted to be clear about that. So another disclaimer, I don't claim to be an expert in Gradle, but I've been using it for a considerable amount of time. There's obviously several specific features and nooks and crannies of Gradle that I haven't encountered as yet, but this is going to be a fairly good opinion of what I feel about Gradle, why I feel Gradle is important, and why I feel we must look into it. If you have any questions, I would request that you hold on to them. There's places within my talk where I've put in for questions. It's because most of it is a little scripted. It's a little, it's a bit of a play, so I wouldn't want to be interrupted every now and then. But I will definitely answer your questions. We will have time at the end of the session to work out any questions that we have. Alright, so coming back to the point. So simplifying build scripts with Gradle. So let's try and understand what we're talking about to begin with. So let's try and understand what a build script is. And to understand a build script, like I said, the difference between a build and a build script. So first we have a build. And what is a build? A build is anything that takes your source and turns it into artifacts. Now, these can be executable artifacts like executable jars, or they could be deployable artifacts like wars and EARs. So sources can be just about anything. It can be your Java code, it could be configuration like in XML, your resource bundles. It could even be things like your Eiffel descriptors, which can get converted into more artifacts. Artifacts are your classes as well as generated code. And then finally, like I said earlier, your executable or deployable artifacts like your jars and EARs and your packages. So that was a build. So we keep talking about build scripts. We all know what a script is. The point I want to make here is why is it important for it to be a build script? Is something that we've been talking about for a while. It's because a build script is something that you're going to be using day in, day out. You're going to be hitting that thing about 100, 200 times a day if you're working very, very fast. So you want it to be very expressive because you want to read it quickly. You don't want to waste too much time trying to understand what this is saying. And you want as little ceremony as possible because if you want to modify it, you want to get in there and change it really fast. Making your build script hard to change, hard to read has the side effect that people then don't want to do anything with the build script. I mean, they don't want to improve the way the build process works because it's just very hard to go in there and do stuff. If you break something, the entire team shouts at you and says, don't touch that thing anymore. So you don't want to do that. So simplifying. This is a tough one. Right? What do you mean when you're trying to simplify something? And this is something that I had been pondering for quite some time, and there have been a lot of discussions about this. The first published material that I read on the whole concept of simple is this article from Better Software. In the November 2006 issue of Better Software, there was an article titled "Simple Ain't Easy." The point I'm trying to make is that just because something is easy doesn't mean it's simple, and conversely, it doesn't mean that making something simple is also easy. Sometimes it can be very hard to make something simple. It will take a while before it can get simple. So that was the sort of thought process that I took off with, and I tried to figure out what it was. Like if you think about easy, a lot of people do think that the opposite of simple is hard, but then the opposite of the hard is actually the opposite of easy and not simple. So you try to figure out what the converse of simple would be. You go down to the root words, and then I came up with the theory that maybe simple could be the opposite of complex. But then there are several complex layered systems which can actually be very simple to understand. They're just layered nicely so that you can look at them one piece at a time. So it wasn't complex. So finally I came down to the idea that probably the converse of simple was complicated. Something is complicated if it has too many moving parts, if there are too many things that you have to take into consideration every time you look into it. Which is a pretty good description of simple, for a while. Of late, the topic of simple.
Can you use this mic?
Either one of, I think there's a lot of interference coming in.
Okay, let's try that. Just turn this off. Alright, can you guys hear me at the back still? Alright, cool. This should be good right now. So the concept of simple has been coming up again for quite some time. The folks from Clojure have been sort of throwing this idea around for the last few months. There's been a bunch of talks at InfoQ and Clojure Bunch. So this was Rich Hickey's talk at Clojure at InfoQ, which talked about how the difference between simple and easy, and how we need to look at it. So the point he was trying to make is that it's not just making things easy should not be your motive. It should be that you have to make things simple. That means what that means we'll look into later. But he again was trying to make the distinction between simple and easy. So if you want to sort of figure out a little more about it, this is a great talk to look at. Another talk that was pretty good about that is the ClojureConf talk by Stuart Holloway, which is titled Simple and Easy, again, Simplicity and Easy. And this is actually a pretty nice talk. Like, the first half of the talk does not even talk about Clojure, it's just about the word simple and its root forms and how you can actually derive the meaning of what simple really means and how it doesn't quite contradict easy or hard. So this is a great talk that you might want to look into. Any questions so far? Alright. So enough talk. Let's actually try and build something. I mean, we're talking about build systems, so let's try and build something. So let's go back to the good old days when we didn't have build systems and we pretty much did everything by hand. So what was the build system of choice? Well, it was pretty much that. That is the simplest. You can read that in the back, right? Okay, good. I was just afraid we couldn't. Anyway, so this is the simplest build system that you can have. I mean, what more do you need? You have Java source, you compile it, right? But then, some genius decided that we wanted to do dynamic class loading and whatnot, so you couldn't just do this. Now you had to find out all of your Java files and then compile them. And now, since you have so many class files, you need to package them into a Java. Then you have manifests and whatnot, which are kind of ignored over here. Then, somebody thought we've got so many classes now, we need to write tests. So now we have, you're compiling the sources, the tests, we're running all of the tests using JUnit, and then we have packaging each other. And then more things came in. Managers came up and said, what are all of these strings in your class files? I don't want strings in JavaScript. So in your Java source, so put them into resource bundles. Now you've got resources all over the place, you've got more steps. And then after that you wanted conditional execution, that I only changed my tests, why should I recompile my source files all over again, things like that. Then you have static analysis, I have so much source, I want to find out what is the psychological complexity of my code. I want to find out how much time it takes to run my tests, I want to find out how long my tests take to run, whatnot. Then you want execution profiling, things like I said, how long does it take to compile my classes? How long does it take to compile my tests? How long do my tests run? Things like that. And then the insanity ensues, and then it's just madness after that. And then that madness is described pretty interestingly by. But that madness is described very interestingly by Dan North, who talks about agile architecture, and he did this presentation called. Simplicity being the way of the agile architect. So he had this very interesting slide, and I'll just read through the slide and you can look at the things that go by. So what happened is initially we had simple compiles. They got replaced by makefiles, where everybody uses make, so they got replaced by makefiles. And then makefiles got replaced by an ant build. Ant builds got replaced by multiple ant builds that were composed using XSLTs. And then all of this got replaced by Maven. Don't worry if you can't read that. That is intentionally in such a small font to protect you. And then once Maven came in, Maven brought in the whole plethora of problems where you end up downloading the internet and you end up with this situation. So how often have we done this? So here was the problem. Is like now we've come from very simplistic build ideas about just compiling classes to really complicated ideas about copying over resources, generating code, cross-compiling things, whatnot. I mean, we've literally complicated the entire matter. So, but then Danwat says that finally sometimes simplicity grows out of adversity. That you finally get to a situation where it's so bad, somebody finally steps back and says, we need to make something simple out of this. By the way, that's the link to Danwat's presentation if you're interested. This is also a presentation that I would recommend that you look at. And hence was born Gradle. Gradle was born, well, not too long ago, I mean, less than a decade. In fact, I think it's less than 5 years. A guy called Hans Doctor from Germany decided that we've just got so many problems right now in the way we write our builds. We just need a better way of doing it. And then he sat down and he re-engineered the whole idea and he came up with Gradle. As an interesting aside, like even before Gradle came up, people tried to improve upon Maven. I don't know if you can call it improvement, but anyway, let's give it a shot. So a lot of people came up with ideas of how you can write Maven build descriptions in nicer ways. And there was a project called Gmaven, which was promoted by the Groovy group, which was essentially, Maven written in Groovy, so it was written as a script itself. But even that turned out to be disruptive because they were still essentially replicating an entire Maven structure in a script. So it was still a trivial build script was still about 1.5 pages long. So a lot of people tried that, and finally Hans Doctor decided that we need to step back and re-engineer this whole idea. I mean, we probably got some of our core concepts wrong, so we just need to think about it again. And he created Gradle. So talk is cheap. Let's look at some code. I'm going to run you through a set of Gradle build scripts to give you an idea of how powerful they are. And we're also going to try and run these scripts along the side so that we can see what they do. So this is your most basic Gradle build script for a Java project. That's it. Apply plugin Java, and that pretty much gives you everything. Let's see what this actually does. So if I copy this over and the Gradle is executed using the Gradle tool, which is just that, and it follows a lot of different conventions. One of the conventions it expects is that the build script is in a file called build.gradle in the current directory. So once I do that, actually this won't do anything, but it should probably stop it. Yeah. Here it is. So what this has done is it's printed out all the tasks available to you using this basic Gradle script. Now, all we did was include the Java plugin, and it immediately gives us a whole bunch of tasks that we need for doing Java comparison. So there is a classes task to compile Java classes. There's test classes to compile your tests. You have your assemble to create. In fact, you have jar which creates your jar. Assemble just orchestrates the whole thing. If you look further down, there are tasks for creating documentation, and then you have these helper tasks which help you run Gradle itself. And then you have sort of high-level tasks that run verification in that. We can ignore the rules for now, we'll come back to that a little later. But here's the point, right? Like, we have so many conventions already out there. We have very well-defined ideas of how we want to lay out our code, how we want to build our projects. Why should we have to describe it every time we do something? So, they've simply applied conventional configuration to the extreme and said, here is the Java plugin, this is the default convention you go with, just lay out your code and you have everything in place. That doesn't mean you're kind of tied into this. You can always change the conventions as and when you need them. But I'm sort of going to run you through the default cases so you get an idea of what the base level functionality of Gradle is. So the next one is a little more like, obviously you can't just live with that. You have external dependencies, right? Like one of the biggest problems Maven solved was finding and downloading external dependencies, other modules that your code depended on. For example, here we have test compile dependency on JUnit and Hamcrest. Just aside, small aside, out of curiosity, how many people use Hamcrest? How many people know about Hamcrest? Oh man, I don't know. This is a point I always make. If you are writing tests in JUnit and not using Hamcrest, you are definitely missing out on something. You should definitely go look into it. Anyway, so what this basically does is this is declared all of your dependencies for your project. That means it says that when I'm trying to compile anything, compile my project, the common CLI is one of my dependencies. When I'm trying to compile my test, I need JUnit, I need Hamcrest. And then Gradle internally uses Ivy, which was what was extracted out of Maven to do just dependency management stuff. And it follows existing Maven and Ivy conventions of where to look for files, where to get them. And it brings down all of these jars for you on its own. So you don't have to tell it where to look for the jar. Actually, you have to tell it where to look for the jars. We'll get to that. But you don't have to you physically go and find all the jars of the right versions and download them and put them to the library and put them on the class path or anything. This does all of that for you. So this is the next script. This just added a repository section, and that's telling Gradle where the repositories for all of these modules are. That means where do you go looking for these dependencies. So right now I'm going to the Maven Central repository, which is at repo1.maven.org. Now obviously they thought about this too. It's like this is how much thought process they actually put into the whole thing. That every project pretty much is going to use the Maven Central repository because it is just like the catch-all for modules out there. So what they did is they went ahead and created a macro for that. So it's called Maven Central, and the Maven Central repository is stuck in there. You don't have to remember what the URL is. And trust me, I forget the URL all the time. I have to go on the internet and try and look up the URL every time. So this just makes it that much simpler. But then you're not, since you're using Maven conventions, you can also use Maven local. So if you have a local Maven repository cache, you can also look up stuff from there. So if you have other projects that use Maven and you are moving to Gradle, you can still use the cache from there. And then of course you are also open to using other repositories. So this is how you can add the java.net repository into your dependencies. And this, so this is sort of what I would call the last resort, is that if you ultimately don't have dependencies that are published on any popular repositories, you can always download them, stick them into a set of directories, and say that you can also look for dependencies in these particular directories. Maybe getting ahead of it. Let's just see what this does actually. I sort of try and run this past you. So now if I'm just sticking all of that code in here, I'm going to run Gradle dependencies. Actually, I'll run Gradle task one more time. And then, so if you look at the helper task, there is actually a task called dependencies that's listed at the top. What that says is that it displays the dependencies for this project. So if you've set up a project and you don't actually want to read the entire configuration but still want to find out what dependencies you have, you can pretty much just do that. You can just go like Gradle dependencies. Sorry. And what it will do is it will actually load up the entire build script, it will run through it and then it will find out what dependencies are needed for what configurations, and it will show you the whole thing. So here it is. So my compile requires common CLI, the default configuration requires common CLI. Since my compile requires common CLI, runtime requires common CLI. The test requires common CLI as well as JUnit and Hamcrest, and so on and so forth. And it's even showing you transitive dependencies along the way. So it's just that much easier to get at. The next build script that we were looking at is this. Now, obviously, up to now we've been using tasks that the Java plugin gave us, but that's never going to be the case. It's never going to be the case that we're going to be satisfied with just that. We're always going to need our own custom task. And the task definition is fairly simple. So if you look at the bottom of this script, that's how you declare a new task. So you say task, your task name, what is the type of the task. So this is technically not required. By default, it's just type generic task. But now I want to create a jar task. I want to create a task that jars up files from certain locations. So I say it belongs to the group build. I give it a nice description so that when it shows up in the documentation, it will show up nicely. Then I say appendix. Appendix is an attribute of the jar task that says what should I append to the beginning of the jar file so that you can tell that it is from this particular task. And from where do I get my source files? So we say from the source sets tests all source, take all the files. So basically, all of your test sources are going to go into this jar. It's as simple as that. I'll try and I'll actually run this and I'll show you how it works out. So if you guys remember how your Maven configurations usually set up stuff, your test sources would usually go under source. Oh, that's too low actually. So I'm just going to construct the standard layout. So it will be source test Java, and then let's just create a file under there. So right now, if I do a Gradle tasks, we should be able to see our test jar task, and then I'll run my test jar task to show you how it works. Where did it go? There it is. So there is my test jar task, which has nicely been placed under the build group with all of its documentation. So when I go like Gradle test jar, so all the artifacts are by default put in a directory called dist. So build. Inside this you should have a libs directory which will have a Gradle trial test jar. So this is the jar that we've created, and instead of just listing it, let's just list out the contents of that jar. So you'll notice that foo.java was included in this. So it's that simple to create custom tasks. So jar isn't the only task type available to you. They've created an entire library of tasks for doing everything from conditional compilation, actually like specific compilation to jarring to zipping to tars to deploys to downloads, everything. I mean, there's like a whole library available there. Plus it's very extensible, so you can write your own custom task classes and stick them into the system too. Moving on. Oh yeah, so now it gets interesting, right? Now this is sort of, this build script is born of a practical scenario that probably a lot of us face. Every now and then, when you build a particular application, you end up with either a jar or a war. But that's probably not the only thing that your client wants as a deliverable. There have often been a lot of clients who also requested our test cases as deliverables. So you want to stick them in an entire jar saying that these are the test cases that we ran against your application. Then they can look at them and feel happy about it. I don't know what. Ordinarily, what would you have to do? You would have to run two different tasks. You would have to run the jar task to generate your standard jar. You would have to run test jar to run your test jars. But you can actually combine all of that by saying that I have an artifact, and that artifact is called deliverables. So I have a number of deliverables that I want to generate, and those artifacts, this artifact is generated by the jar task as well as the test jar task. And deliverables, by the way, is a configuration. So you create a configuration that has a number of artifacts associated with it. So we say these are the tasks that will generate the artifacts for this configuration. So once you put this in place, What I can then do is I can do a Gradle build deliverables. So when I say this, what it's going to do is it's going to look for an artifact called deliverables, look up all the tasks that will generate those artifacts, and it will run all of that. So it's run the jar task, it's run the test jar task. So it says, so our build deliverables has been created, and if we look at build libs, we should find both jars, your application jar as well as your test jar in place. You'll also notice that a lot of these tasks have been flagged as up to date. So a little while ago we talked about conditional compilation. Things like, if I've already generated my test jars and nothing has changed, why should I generate it all over again? Gradle gives you that for free. It's already done that. So it noticed that we had already built a test jar and nothing's changed since then, so I won't run that task again. Okay, so this is to give you an idea of some of the other possible task types that we can look at. I'm going to have to sort of set up this code a little bit. Before I actually run it, I'll run you through it. So this is a slightly different project. What we're doing here is we're saying that we have a project that gets its artifacts from Maven, depends on the test compile configuration, depends on JUnit and Hamcrest, and then there's a run task. I have defined a custom task called run task, which is of type Java exec. Now the Java exec task is something that you can use to execute Java classes. So if you've got classes with main methods in them, this is what you would use to run them. So you tell it what the main method is, you tell it what the class path for that execution should be, and then it just runs it. Now if you notice, the class path is actually again set up in terms of your sources itself. So if you remember the Maven layout, source sets main is going to be where your actual application sources go. So you say that take the main source set, whatever is the runtime class path of that main source set, inject that into the class path of this task. To actually run this, I will need to -r. So this is the source that I've brought in. It's just a bunch of small classes. It's a small hello world sort of application that I had written. I'm not going to go into the source of this because it's kind of irrelevant. The only thing is that the main class has a main method. When you call it, it just says hello whoever you are, and you can give it parameters and whatnot. So with this source in place, I can simply say Gradle run. Oh shit, I misspelled that. And it will go through the entire process. So it compiles your Java sources, processes your resources, got your classes, jarred it, assembled it, and it's run it, and here's the output. Here's the output. Right? So all of that with just that much of code. So the next thing you want, like I told you, the main class also takes arguments. So how would you do that? This is sort of a meta example. What I'm going to run, I'm going to show you what this behavior does, and then I'll explain what it does to you. So I renamed the. No, I haven't renamed it actually. Anyway, that doesn't matter. Okay, so we have our existing task. Run, which prints out the default output if you don't give it any arguments. And then what I've done is I've created more tasks where you can say greet index j, and then it should say hello index j. right there.
Sagar, it's a very dumb question, but it's not taking 3 or 4 seconds, but it's kind of listing its take this much time. Is it wrong? It's showing more time than what actually we can see it on the screen. Or is it milliseconds?
No, it is actually 3.4 seconds. I don't know, I mean, I think it is taking that much time. Takes about 3 seconds. I guess we're all just so excited we think it's running really fast. Anyway, so if you notice though, if we go back to here, we haven't actually declared a task called greet IndictJ, but that's already available to us. That's come to us through something called a rule, and rules are one way of dynamically defining tasks. So when you give it a task to execute, it will run it through all the available rules, and for all the rules that it passes, it will execute those rules. So in the rule you say, this is the task name that the Gradle project was given. I'm saying that if the task name starts with a greet, create a new task, that is the name of that, with the same task name, which again does the exact same thing. It runs the Java exec with the main file, this class path, and here I am giving it the arguments that I can put into it. So by dynamically defining this, I can actually at execution time switch this out to be whatever I want it to be. So that way I don't have to figure out a way to engineer parameters in. So that's another interesting capability that Gradle has. Rules? Actually, we just saw a use case a little while ago, and I can go back to that and I'll show you. Okay, yeah, this was actually the one. So remember when we created an artifact that described, sort of a combination of all the artifacts that you want to do for jars and this thing. So if you notice, the Java plugin gives us some rules by itself. Here are the rules that it gives you. And the build deliverables task that I created or executed was actually created by this rule, the build whatever configuration name rule, because you declared deliverables as a configuration. So beforehand, when you are actually writing out your script, you are not going to have all of your configurations and all of your artifacts pre-planned, right? So you can use something like this to engineer that. If you've got sort of several ideas that you want to declare, and then just dynamically create tasks to execute them. I had another example of rules, I think, if I don't remember. No, I think it's the same example all over again. But basically the idea is this, right? It's like a whole lot of times you want to say, you want to run, so supposing your application has different entry points. You have a number of main methods all over the place. Instead of creating individual run tasks for all of them, run this, run that, run whatever, you can simply say run, you can create a rule that says run this component. And then within that rule, you can figure out the logic to come up with what is the main class for that component, what should the class path be, what should the arguments be, things like that.
So this is a very distinct feature compared to the
Basic, I don't know. I thought Maven had this, and I'm not sure, although I haven't used Maven as much. So. But this is a pretty nice feature. I mean, like I said, Gradle's got a lot of arcane features that hit you every now and then, but you don't realize the value of these till you actually get to a point or in that one particular situation where you say, cool, this thing really works here. Alright, so where were we? Okay, yeah, this was a variation on the example that we saw earlier. The top half is actually kind of useless. But again, I've actually refactored out all of this. So over here, if you notice, I create the two tasks explicitly at both places. The task run is created up there, and then we have this task declaration again over here. But most of it is pretty much the same, right? You have the main and the class path is the same in both places. So you're just conditionally plugging in arguments to the task. So since we are writing this in a scripting language and we're not just writing it in a purely declarative context, we have the power of just about any other language. So I can go ahead and I can create a function. This is a standard function. Gradle is written in Groovy. You don't need to know the semantics of Groovy right now. But this is a standard function that we're calling. So think of this as public static task, greeting task with argument name. And then what we're doing is we're checking if the name argument actually exists. If it exists, we're turning it into an array, otherwise we're substituting it with an empty array. And then we're creating a new task. I'll tell you what the do first and this syntax does later, but focus on the task for now. We're creating a new task dynamically. So then the first thing I do is I define a generic task that just greets you. So this will be just greet because we're prefixing the name of the task with greet. And then in the rule, now I can simplify the rule, right? So if the name is greet, simply create a greeting task that has the task name less the greet element. That's it. So once I stick this in, so you notice that this is the default task that we created, just greet. And then we have a rule over here that says greet name. So I can go like Gradle greet, which would just give you the standard hello world, hello message. I'll show you how all the decoration is coming. That's actually part of this demo itself. But anyway, so aside from this, I can also do that. Spelling zone for a task. Okay. So there we are. So that is one of the advantages of your build script actually being a script as opposed to being sort of configuration, right? In configuration, it's very hard to do this kind of stuff. It's hard to do stuff like looping and filtering and conditional execution. But since you're in a script environment, you have all of that power at your disposal. So yeah, going back to the task, you notice the decoration that came in. So when I created this task, I gave it a do first action. This syntax with curly braces just like that is actually a closure. So you can think of it as a code block that I'm passing to it. So I'm telling this task basically before you execute yourself, do this. So print out a string of equal to. And this syntax adds actions to the task. So sequentially you can add in more actions that you want to perform. So you want to do this plus that plus that plus that. So at the end of the task execution, I am printing out the hashes. This alternatively I could also have done by putting a do last over here, which would ensure that that particular action executes at the very end of the task execution phase. So this is another interesting tool that Gradle has. The real power of do first and do last comes in when you want to do something before or after an existing task. Like for example, if you have a compilation and just before the compilation you want to do something. You want to say, for example, you want to signal to someone that your code is being compiled. Say you're running the compilation on the CI server, and you want to tell someone who submitted the code that their build has actually been picked up and we are going to be running the compilation and so commit now, right? So you can do a do first that announces that over your IM channel or over sends out an email or something that lets people know that this build has now begun. And you put in the do last that announces whether the build succeeded or failed or whatnot. So you can do things like that using do first and do last. Moving on, so we've got a fair idea of what standard tasks you can create, what power Gradle has on the basis. I want to sort of introduce you to the range of different kinds of projects that Gradle can handle. So up to now we've been looking at Java projects, but the problem is today web seems to be the currency of the day. It's like everything is built as a web project. So Gradle is not far behind. It has a plugin called War, which gives you all of the support for building standard Java EE wars. and it has a plugin called Jetty, which allows you to create an in-process Jetty server and run that one. So if I just copy this into our build file, and if we look at the tasks that we have here, so yeah, there we are. So what it's done is it's given you, oh, actually it's much higher. It's given you all the default tasks that you have in the standard Java project, which is assemble, build needed, classes, clean, jar, etc. And it's created a war task, which will then take all the web elements as well as your classes and package them nicely into a war. And at the bottom, these are the Jetty tasks. So Jetty run will simply run your files in place as an exploded war. Jetty run war will take your assembled war and run it in an in-process Jetty. And you can also stop the Jetty server using another command. So you don't have to manually break it. So that's another. So this is usually like the biggest use case for this would be testing. If you have Selenium tests or large functional tests that you're running on the running application, you can actually use the Jetty plugin to host your application, fire it up using Gradle, have your tests run the Jetty stop to turn it off, and your build closes. So you can do the whole thing within Gradle itself. You don't have to step out to do it. Yeah, since we've been talking about other languages, Gradle also supports a number of other languages. Built within Gradle is support for Scala using the Scala plugin. And like we've discussed for a while now, the only thing that you really need to do is you need to stick in where your Scala tooling comes from and your Scala libraries. Although actually this is put in the wrong dependency, but you basically need to just configure the Scala lib in there. And once you've done this, it becomes then a standard Gradle build. You put all of your Scala sources in the right place, it will compile them, it will package them all by itself. This is how you would do it for Groovy. Similar, Groovy seems to have fewer dependencies. This is Clojure. I put in this example for a very specific reason. The Clojure plugin is not part of the Gradle distribution. So the funny thing is, it becomes a sort of a chicken and egg problem, right? So when you say apply for plugin Clojure, it has to look up the Clojure plugin from within its class path. But the Clojure plugin isn't there. But you would like Gradle to pull down the Clojure plugin itself without you having to manually go look it up and install it manually. Right? That'd just be another page. Why do we have a build script in place? So the build script block here allows you to. So then you say that these are the repositories where you can get stuff from, and the class path for the build script needs to include this module called ClojureRest, which has the Clojure plugin. And then after we have that in place, we can then apply the Clojure plugin, and then we can do the rest of the things. Clojars is the Maven repo equivalent for Clojure, and they've given us a small macro to include the Clojars repo in there. This comes in from the Clojure plugin. And then obviously you need to put in the dependency to the Clojure library to compile your sources. But it's that simple. Once you've gotten this in place, you can build basic Clojure projects. Recently they've added experimental support for C++. So this thing is not limited to the JVM. It's essentially a build script. You can build anything with this. So the CPP plugin can build both libraries and executables. Once you've laid it out correctly, it will compile it using whatever GCC whatever C compiler and linker you've configured in the script. There's obviously little more configuration which I have not included here, but it'll just be about 3 or 4 lines. You will tell it where to find the compiler, where to find the linker, and whatnot. And then it will go and build everything and stick everything out for you. A few other interesting plugins that come along with Gradle, batteries included, is the Announce plugin. So we were talking about announcing, build events on email or Twitter or IRC, stuff like that. All of that is built into the Announce plugin. So you can just put in the Announce plugin, and then it gives you a bunch of tasks that you can configure. Simply say that this is my IRC channel, these are the username and password, announce to that. And then you can plug in where to announce. There is a Maven plugin which kind of seems counterintuitive, but it's actually interesting, is that what this allows you to do is it allows you to interact with your local Maven repos, as well as deal with Maven POM files. We'll see how that works out if time permits. It's actually a pretty involved sort of process. The OSGI plugin, if any of you have used OSGI, you know that setting up and packaging an OSGI bundle can be kind of painful. Dhananjay will attest to that over there. So the OSGI plugin sort of automates a lot of that. So once you tell it, this is the manifest for my OSGI, these are the files that need to be included in that, it will package all of those jars, write up the manifest, set all of that up for you. You don't have to do any of that Gmail. Harshad, how are you doing in time? Oh, okay, you need to hurry up. Okay, then there's a few other utility plugins that for code quality, project reporting, and signing and stuff like that. The project report one is actually pretty interesting. It's a little experimental, but it's interesting that it lets you generate project reports for this Gradle project, as in what tasks it has, what projects and sub-projects you're dealing with, and what are the dependencies for this project and stuff like that. So it would be great for project documentation for your team members. So if you have a large team and people don't understand how your project is set up, you can simply generate this documentation, publish it somewhere, people can read it anytime. It will be better than a wiki because it becomes automatically updated every time you change your build script, basically. Finally, there is this wrapper task. It's a very special task that Gradle provides you. So again, it comes back to it being a chicken and egg problem, right? To execute Gradle, you need to download and install Gradle, which is again painful. I don't want to do that. I have a build script for stuff like that, right? So the wrapper task pretty much does that. Once you stick this task into your build script, that didn't work out very well. So I'm just sticking in one task called wrapper. What this does, so what you do is you execute this task one time and it generates a whole bunch of files for you, and then we'll see what those files do. So if you look at this, it has generated a file called Gradle. It's generated a file called Gradle W, which is a shell script. It's also generated a batch file, which is the Windows equivalent if you're working on Windows. And it creates this folder called Gradle. Let's just look at this folder now. So what this has is it has a wrapper jar and it has a bunch of properties. So So all this properties file has is where your distribution in this thing should be. Now what Gradle wrapper does basically is, supposing you hand over this build script to someone who doesn't already have Gradle installed on their machine. The first time they run the Gradle W script, the wrapper script, it will actually check if there is a Gradle installation on that machine. If there isn't one, it will go download Gradle, install it, and then run the build script for you. So you don't even have to have Gradle installed on your machine to start off. If you've got your wrappers in, what you simply do is you run the wrapper script, you check all of this into your source code repository. Next time someone checks out your source, they can simply run the wrappers and work off that. You don't even have to go through the trouble of finding and downloading and installing Gradle. And then upgrading it is very simple. Upgrading it, actually there's a property here which they haven't mentioned, but you can simply specify the version of Gradle you want to use and it will pick up the right version from the Gradle artifact repositories and pull that down for you. So even that is batteries included. Like you don't even have to think about installing Gradle. That's pretty much all about the code that I had. This is a few or more slides that I want to run through. For more interesting sort of examples of how you can use Gradle and all the cool sort of ideas that they've implemented, there's this blog by this fellow called Heinrich Müller, I think. I don't remember his full name, but he's called Mr. Haki. He has this really awesome blog where he talks about all things Groovy, and he's got a tag called Gradle Goodness, which has a list of really, really cool Gradle snippets that sort of describe how powerful Gradle can be. So I showed you the closure plugin, which was one that was community contributed. But if you look on GitHub, if you just run the repository search on GitHub for Gradle and plugin, you find about 70, 80 odd plugins out there. Like people are actively building plugins for Google App Engine, for Grails, for Play, and a lot of these meta frameworks. Like people are actively trying to bring them into Gradle. In fact, LinkedIn has a whole bunch of Gradle contributions out there. So if you look at the LinkedIn GitHub repository, they've actually got an entire set of repositories that add stuff to Gradle. Yes. So what if you're stuck in Maven? What if you've got Maven forms all over the place and it's just too painful to move on? Well, other people have faced this problem, and the solution they came up with is they actually created a tool called Maven to Gradle, which takes all of your POM files and spits out Gradle build scripts. So like it's not perfect, there are problems with it, but at least it gives you something to start with. If you've got a large POM file, just run it through this, it will give you a basic Gradle script, and then you can tweak it to your convenience. So it's not, this is just one way to move off Maven. A small pitch is that Gradle is currently owned and maintained by this company called Gradleware. After building the open source project, they decided they wanted to make money off it, so they built a company around it. So they offered training as well as custom development for it. So if you're ever worried about, what do you want to tell your managers, who handles this, where are we going to get information, there's people out there willing to give you all the training and all the help you need with this tool provided you pay them. Alright, so that was pretty much it. Sorry? Oh, okay. The question was, does Gradle have integration with IDEs? The Gradle developers work on IntelliJ, so they have a first-class IntelliJ plugin in there. I believe there is an Eclipse plugin. The NetBeans plugin is under construction. Personally, I use the command line. But it's available. It's there. The NetBeans plugin is a little flaky, but they're actively building it. Eclipse, I believe, is fairly good. I think the IntelliJ one is the best right now. I'm not sure though, because I rarely use them. Alright, so that's actually the end of my talk. Before we move on to questions, I'd like to remind you, please provide me feedback, because I'm notoriously bad at timing and stuff like that, so I need to know. I'd also like it if you give me feedback on my SpeakerRate page. So I have a SpeakerRate page for this talk put up. If you could just let me know how it turns out over there as well. And that's it. Any questions?
How it compares to SBT?
SBT is specifically with Scala, right? So I've never really used SBT, but the point of Gradle is that it is, a build tool. It is not a Java build tool or a Scala build tool or Clojure. It's a build tool. You can build anything with it. Like I showed you basic Java tasks and Java tasks. There's also an exec task which lets you run shell commands. So essentially anything that you can orchestrate with a bunch of shell scripts, you can stick it into Gradle. Anything else? Alright, I guess.
Basically, why should a Maven user move to Gradle? I use some Maven, though not all of it. It has some good features, but why should I think of exploring Gradle? In what situations will it be? What does it offer basically as compared to Maven? Still I'm not clear about it.
Do you really want to be reading through that kind of stuff? I mean, seriously, that is a Maven POM that I picked up from the Maven website. Like, this is from maven.apache.org. Okay, this is like one of their basic POMs. I really don't want to read through that. I mean, my first use case is, why would you want to write your build in a format that is hard to read, hard to maintain? The second thing is,
it can be like a long POM file because you have many dependencies, so that will be there.
But that's the point. Okay, so personal experience, one of the projects in our organization, I took a POM file that was almost 200 lines long, and the exact same functionality, I dropped it down to about 25 lines.
In Gradle. So that's what I'm looking for. Like, what exactly was the change? Do you have
It's
any
just
idea?
so much nicer to write, right? It's like that was the point I was making. If you keep your build scripts in a format that is easy to read, easy to write, and easy to maintain, people will not be afraid to change your build process. A lot of times what happens is then you usually end up sequencing build activities. You know, we will run Maven, then we will run the minification, we will run the web page generation, this, that, and then we will run a separate task to put it all together. If people are comfortable using your build script, you can do all of that using Maven, but it's very likely people will not want to do it in Maven because it's just hard, right? When Maven fails, it gives you errors that you have to pull your hair out to understand. It's like, if you've got something that is so much more maintainable, that is just so much of an advantage to me. And the second thing obviously is that Gradle by architecture seems really nice to me. I mean, personally, it's built entirely using plugins. Like for example, the basic stuff that I showed you for Java, right? Even that comes in as a plugin. So you can actually run it without that. So if you want to just run Gradle as something that orchestrates a bunch of shell scripts or shell script-like activities, you can even do that in Gradle.
I think Maven also has plugins.
Yes, but then that's the point, right? Why do you need a plugin for something like that? Like a basic build tool should just be able to run tasks. And then your plugin sort of enhance that to do specific kind of tasks. I'll agree, Maven is actually a very good, very powerful tool. I just wish it had not been so complicated to configure.
Yeah, I agree. This might be better, but still, what makes it better? That exactly is not clear to me. Like how you reduce the complexity of, because no examples were taken.
I don't know. I mean, so this would reduce into like literally 1/10 of the size if I had to turn this into Gradle.
When we come from Ant to Maven, there was the same sentence which said that Ant is so much complex that Maven makes it so simple. The syntaxes of Ant are too complex to understand for any human readable thing, and that makes Maven life so simpler for the kid.
So
That's the point. Is like saying the Maven is obviously when the Gradle is being written, Maven was already there in the market. So obviously they have a better quality in the sense of they already using the existing Maven features and writing on top of it. Obviously, it has less lines.
So I would. We don't have a whole lot of time, and Harsha is already staring at me. But anyway, I'll take a few more questions. I'll try and squeeze a few. But I'll counter that to you by saying that the problem with Maven is that it makes a whole lot of its actions implicit. Like you don't know what Maven is doing a whole lot of the time. And the problem with Ant is that it explicitly requires you to say everything. Like I want to do this, that, and whatnot. Even if you want to download modules, you have to pretty much do it physically. Which is why people after a while got frustrated and pulled Ivy out of Maven and then started using Ivy with Ant. So before Gradle, my suggestion to anybody would have been to use Ivy and Ant because the biggest use case of Maven that I have seen around, as many projects I've seen is for dependency management. But Maven does so much more. So you sort of got a lot of baggage for dependency management that you could get using Ivy. So Ant and Ivy makes for a much better case if you are in that sort of a spot. That's my point. It's like Maven has so much implicit knowledge in it that when things go wrong, it becomes a task to figure out where it went wrong and why it went wrong.
As a concept, Maven still like in the Gradle also we are using
It's exactly the same concept. In fact, Gradle has borrowed tons of things from Maven. And it's left out all the undesirable stuff, basically. So that's how I would put it. Is that Gradle is Maven plus minus minus. It's like it's a little more than Maven in a few areas, and it's pulled out a lot of the stuff in Maven that we really don't need.
Integration with CI server. CI.
Oh, there are so the de facto CI server for Java projects is Hudson. It has a Hudson plugin, but even then, like. The Hudson plugin is very useful and it's very seamless, right? So obviously it's transferred into Jenkins and Nectar also. But the cool thing is like since Gradle is executed as a simple one command execution, you could even stick it in a shell script in Hudson. I mean, it would be just as simple to do that. But there is support for the Gradle in Hudson. In fact, I knew I was going to be short on time, but otherwise I was going to put in a demo of firing up a Hudson server and firing up the Gradle task of that. Anything else?
So I was thinking like for cruise control we have again the AND file. I mean, so can that configuration be also in Gradle?
For
For defining
cruise control has its own
project,
XML
we have to
configuration,
define a
right?
project and stuff. So
But that is cruise control's XML, right? That's
Yes,
actually
yes.
different. That's not a build script.
yes.
But now that you've mentioned it, I'd like to point out that Ant is a first-class citizen in Gradle. So if you've got existing Ant build files, build.xml, there is actually an Ant builder built into Gradle. So you can simply import those and execute Ant targets from within Gradle also. So that's another sort of migration path that you can take. So if you've got Ant builds, just run them through Gradle for now and then slowly start migrating them into Gradle. I guess we're done. Alright, thank you guys.